is Shackleton. I was born in Ireland in 1874, but I grew up between Dublin and London. At 16, my father landed me a job as an apprentice navigator with the North Western Shipping Company. During my time on the seas, I learned a lot. At 24, I passed all the tests to become certified to command a British ship anywhere in the world. My incredible relationship with Cedric Longstaff helped me get close to Llewellyn W. Longstaff, who helped me become a third deck officer, responsible for food and provisions for the voyage. During this expedition, I witnessed the conflicts that can occur in situations of deprivation. This especially happens when some are privileged over others. I was also responsible for organizing shows and entertainment, highlighting the importance of keeping the group busy and active. The Discovery Expedition explorers reached the southernmost point ever reached. However, we did not manage to reach the South Pole. I became ill with scurvy, and the captain in charge, Sir Robert Falcon Scott, ordered me to return to England. This left me with an indescribable longing to return, so I could fulfill my goal. I tried again on board the Nimrod and came within 180 kilometers of succeeding. For this feat, on my return, I was honored and knighted by King Edward VII. But the Norwegian Roald Amundsen reached the South Pole for the first time in 1913. Other milestones were achieved, such as crossing the Antarctic continent from end to end. Several explorers had tried and failed, but I would put together a team to achieve it. I had experience of Antarctica. I knew what we could face, including the cold, months of complete darkness, complications, constant danger, and above all, we all needed the strength of character to face the unknown. For those who had never experienced such conditions, I could not sugarcoat what we were about to encounter. We may fail, but if we achieve our goal, we would be honored and recognized. For this trip, I would remember the successes and mistakes of Robert Falcon Scott and Roald Amundsen. Their experiences taught me the importance of good planning and how crucial teamwork and using sledge dogs as a form of transport were. In choosing the crew, I focused on learning each person's character and their potential to develop creative solutions when adversity arises. I looked for people with different profiles and skills, those capable of forming a good working team. In the end, we will be 56 members divided into 2 groups of 28 men each, and we will travel on 2 different ships with 2 different missions. I would go on the Endurance, named after my family motto. We would make our way to the Weddell Sea to dock in Vassal Bay, and from there we would carry out the transcontinental expedition on foot. To complete the mission, the work of the men of the Aurora was essential. This very ship would arrive in Murdoch Strait, opposite side to where the Endurance was due to dock. From there, they would have to set up warehouses with supplies along the route we had established across the continent. As soon as we had everything in place, the First World War broke out. Despite offering my provisions for the country's benefit, I was allowed to continue with the expedition. On the 8th of August, 1914, we started our expedition. We reached South Georgia first, where we had to stay for more than a month. This was because the ice barrier that forms around the Antarctic continent was larger and thicker than usual, preventing us from moving forward. We continued our voyage on the 5th of December 1914, and in 2 days we reached the Great Ice Barrier. We advanced for 6 weeks through the waterways that remained open, trying to reach Vassal Bay. However, the ship became imprisoned when the surrounding water finally froze over. We used saws in an attempt to reach navigable spaces, but were unsuccessful. We would spend the winter on that desolate piece of ice. I was hoping to have the same success as Wilhelm Filchner, who became free from an identical nightmare after 6 months when spring came to melt the ice, freeing his ship. Perhaps the same thing would happen to my Endurance. A man must mold himself to new guidelines quickly once the old ones have been discarded, I thought, to encourage myself and accept the idea that the paradigms I had arrived with were no longer valid and I had to adapt to new ones. The ship became our camp. We organized many activities to improve coexistence and strengthen bonds and team spirit. I tried to eliminate hierarchy at all costs. Part of this meant I did not hesitate to intervene and demote when someone mistreated those under their command. I wanted to get my message across. We were all important there, and we were a unit. The arrival of spring signaled the melting and cracking of ice floes. The pressure of the iceberg that held the Endurance imprisoned caused the hull to twist and splinter. Water poured into the ship. It was unsafe to continue living there, so we set up a camp outside the ship called Dump Camp. It was difficult to see the Endurance in that state. What to do? I walked across the block to navigable water and, using the lifeboats, paddled to the land. I organized everything as if it were a long-term project with 3 strategic resources to manage: boats, dogs, and food. I instructed the crew to carry as few personal belongings as possible. However, I also understood the psychological impact of spending a long winter with few provisions and in a makeshift camp. The team needed something to occupy their thoughts, a tangible memory of home, something to remind them of their people. So I allowed them to keep the photographs. Setting a good example for the crew to follow, I got rid of my gold coins and my cigarette box, which I threw onto the ice. The rest of the men followed my lead and left their objects too, to contribute to the team's progress. Sadly, this meant ordering the shooting of Mrs. Chippy, the ship's pet cat, and 3 kittens. Some did not forgive me for this decision. On the 30th of October, 1915, we set out on the march. However, we immediately faced difficulties due to the arduous terrain and conditions. Only 2 days later, having made little progress, we had to abandon and establish a new camp, which we called Ocean Camp. Throughout the journey, I managed the food reserves, hoping to prevent us from getting sick. As food intake has a high psychological impact, I strategically used this resource. Despite the food shortages, I would increase the rations during difficult times. 2 examples include when we had to abandon the first crossing attempt, or the day we finally saw the Endurance sink. When men had acclimatized to the new, challenging situation, I would reduce the daily intake again. At Ocean Camp, the months passed and summer arrived, bringing sunstroke from the sun's harsh reflection. Our life became increasingly difficult. The ice floes melted. We sank to our knees when we walked, and the sledges could proceed forward. We feared the patch of ice we were on would disintegrate. Seeing how dangerous our situation was, I set up an emergency plan, and at the blast of my whistle, within 5 minutes, we were ready with everything on the sledges to go. I spent time assessing our situation and our chances. Ultimately, I decided the time had come to make a second attempt to reach the mainland. But 7 days into the trek, we were forced to stop again and set up another camp called Patience Camp. As had happened to us in the previous attempt, and despite our best efforts, we had covered very few kilometers. I knew it was vital for all of us to release stress and negative feelings throughout the cohabitation. I allowed the expression of fair grievances among the crew to avoid major hostilities. In conflict management, I found it helpful to know the group members' characters, and according to the challenges they presented to me, I sought solutions to prevent disagreements from escalating. This degree of person management helped ensure coexistence was as peaceful as possible. At Patience Camp, life became complicated. We ate only 1 biscuit a day. Despite the crew's uncertainties and frustrations, they were keenly aware of the situation. We had to melt ice in cans, using our body heat to have water to drink. After all, we had no way to light a fire. Our situation became so dire that I had to order the last 2 remaining dog teams to be shot so that the crew could eat them. We felt a whirlwind of emotions as we watched the mainland drift far into the distance. We were perilously floating on the ice floe without reaching it. Nevertheless, my spirits remained high and optimistic. I was sure we would reach an island. The ice floe we were on broke up, and we were forced to throw our boats into the water. We spent days rowing through the tracks between great drifting masses of ice as we made our way to Deception Island. We slowly began to approach the ice floes to camp and sleep on them. However, When this was not possible, we tied the boats together so that they would not separate during the night. We endured many great calamities, but we managed to reach the open sea. Sadly, I made a mistake for which nearly cost us dearly. We did not stockpile ice to have fresh water. As a result, we suffered from such extreme thirst that we could only relieve it with raw seal meat, whose blood momentarily calmed our need for water. We were all very worn out, so I seriously feared for our lives during this sea-crossing voyage. In this situation of lack and uncertainty, we helped each other and even found ways to laugh. These moments showed the importance of group spirit and comradeship. I remember when Worsley told me that instead of moving forward, we had gone backwards from our starting point. This meant we were, after all this time, much further away from reaching Deception Island. This was devastating news. I had to compose myself quickly. I decided to change our destination. We would go to Elephant Island. Although it was more difficult to reach because of the currents and wind, it was closer. Despite the difficult conditions, Worsley was able to get his bearings and point us in the right direction. This gave me great comfort, knowing I had chosen the right team members based on their skills and abilities. Throughout the journey, I had my mind focused on making plans for when we reached land. We made it. We reached Elephant Island, but discovered that the bay we had arrived in suffered from high tides, covering it in water. We had to find another place to camp. I decided not to share the bad news with the rest of the group right away. I wanted the feeling of having reached the mainland to last. "Excellent, Shackleton," I said to myself. "We've completed another stage on our way back home." And I couldn't help remembering a phrase I had once said to Frank Worsley. "You've got to be damned optimistic." We found another safe place to settle. There were days of extreme difficulty and significant challenges that affected the group's spirit. On one occasion, facing an attempted revolt, I had to draw my weapon to stop those hiding behind grievances from doing their daily activities. Another time, a team member had expressed a desire to let himself die, so I assigned him the cook's duties. Keeping him busy with more ordinary concerns of life focused his thoughts on the more ordinary concerns of life, taking his mind off his desire to die. I knew Elephant Island was a very remote place. No one would look for us there. We had to be the ones to look for the help we needed. To do that, I decided we had to get to South Georgia before the waters froze again. With a team of 5 men and a month's supply, we would go on a suicide mission, driven by our determination and courage to save everyone in the group. The rest of the men would be left on Elephant Island. They would await a rescue ship. We set off on the 24th of April, 1916, entering the ocean south of Cape Horn, knowing these were waters battered by the stormiest storms on the planet, and we were going into the ocean in a simple rowboat. We took 4-hour watches and 4-hour rest shifts. In addition to the intense cold, we faced continuous wet and dampness, and the space we had was so small that we could not move or rest well. I established defined routines for hot food and drink. On the 6th day, we were halfway to our destination. Each of us faced the difficulty of the voyage with a very different attitude. I suppose each person had a different way of coping. For example, one man sang. Another, without being the strongest, was always happy. Another suffered from great spirit, but the youngest and strongest, despite his experience, collapsed and ceased to be an active member of the crew. And I, as always, kept my optimism. My hopes grew and strengthened my spirit because it seemed we would make it. We used the spirit of camaraderie to stay alive. We did it! We made it to South Georgia! I have often marveled at the fine line that divides success from failure and the sudden turn that leads from seemingly certain disaster to relative safety, I thought when I was certain that the danger had passed. Unfortunately, when we arrived on the island, there were no whaling stations. To reach one of them, we needed to cross overland to the opposite end. This meant stepping into uncharted territory. Upon regaining our strength, I led the way, followed by 2 men. Teamwork, tenacity, optimism and responsibility for knowing the lives of 25 men depended on me were decisive to walk without rest for 36 hours, overcoming all kinds of obstacles until we reached the whaling station. Despite my best attempts, I did not have a chance to rescue the men from Elephant Island until August. Helped by the Chilean government, we set sail to rescue them in the middle of the month. Aboard the Yelko, with the Villalon as captain, we reached the coast of the island. My heart burst with joy when, within an hour, the crew was on board, all still alive. Frank Wilde, in charge at Elephant Island for 3 months, told me he had tried to apply the same philosophy of keeping morale high and the men active. They created a camp which they had named Snuggery and set up watch shifts, and although Wilde assured me he remained optimistic, our rescue came in time. Out of sheer desperation and with winter approaching, some men had expressed a desire to take one of the boats and launch out to sea, hoping a ship would find them. Paradoxically, the Aurora team did fulfill their objectives by setting up support stations. Nevertheless, their work was futile because we never reached our destination. They lost 10 of their members in carrying out their mission, and only 3 dogs were saved. I think we were all able to see many things about God and nature, but above all, we got to know the naked soul of man.